Hello and welcome everyone to Scott Schilling Speaks. I'm your host, Scott Schilling. Going to have a great show here today. We've got a two-time best-selling author, expert on relationships, Susan White. Thanks for joining us here on Scott Schilling Speaks.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Everybody's going to be excited by what you're going to share too. So,
I,
you're also part of brilliant, uh, brilliant
Brilliant
break, brilliant
breakthroughs
breakthroughs,
for the
volume
small
5.
business owner.
That's right.
It's a
And so
mouthful.
it is. So um, tell a little bit, uh, tell our audience, why'd you get involved in this project to begin with, the book and the book series?
Well, there are so many reasons. Um, First, I thought it would be cool to be an author.
Yeah,
That's number one. I thought
it
it would
is
be
very
very
cool to
cool
be
to
an
be an
author. I get it.
author. I love business. I love being in the business I'm in, because most people don't stop to think about me as a business person. They think about me as a clinical social worker or a therapist. But indeed, I do have a business.
Mhm.
And when the publisher, Maggie Mongan, presented the idea to me of what she wanted to do and the four pillars, uh, profitability, productivity, people, and finding peace in your in your small business. That last one, it just kind of shook me, and I thought to myself, I know how to be peaceful in my business. Wouldn't it be amazing if other people could find out how to be peaceful? So that was it. And I've always got things I'm teaching people who come to see me for therapy because they don't hear themselves the way I hear them.
Mhm.
They don't experience themselves the way I experience them. So, out of the gate for volume one, I wrote about um, the shadow, and shadow parts are all those disowned parts of ourselves. So I wrote about hope as not a strategy, in terms of how we use shadow parts to deceive ourselves that we're actually taking action, and we aren't. We're hopeful, but we aren't doing what we really need to do in order to be successful. So that was chapter one, volume one. So the next time, you'll love this, Scott. For volume two, Maggie said, would you like to be an author again? And I said, sure, because we were number one. We
That's
were
right.
number one bestseller for volume one. And I wanted to find out if it was an anomaly or we really had something amazing. And I
That's,
found out because we have something amazing.
yeah, there's no doubt that small business owners, small business people, the people around those businesses obviously have the need to have quality relationships and all the various things they do. So, how do you take and build around that within the small business to really help them grow their business, uh, solidify the business, things like that? What process do you use to help them grow their relationships and develop
Well,
this authenticity?
Well, I use people to people because in my primary work as a clinician, I meet with people one on one as a rule, and I've met with all sorts of executives and small business owners and people who want to own businesses, and we get to know one another. And when I get to know them, then I find out what's going on with them in terms of their relationships, and I find out what their dreams are and what's holding them back. And then I start to work with people individually to create what they actually say they want in their lives. So that's how I have done it. I guess you would say I go in through the back door
Yeah,
because
really.
I don't go in as somebody that walks into a business and says, I'm here to help you. What kind of challenges are you having? People come to me with their own personal challenges, and sometimes those challenges are at a very high corporate level, and sometimes they're at a more personal level. And then when I get to know them, I find out that there's a thread of whatever's going on with them all throughout their life. That's the human nature. That's who we are as humans.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? A lot of
Mhm.
times people say, "Are you a business coach?" And I say, "Well, yeah, I am, but it ends up being life coaching that happens to have a business as opposed to business coaching that happens to have a life." So
Uh, I like the way you put that.
yeah, well, I totally agree with you there that
Mhm.
the reality is you can't separate one from the other, or quite frankly, if you do, you're going to be in trouble. You know
Well,
that.
whoever we are as people, that's who's going to show up in our business unless we're big old phonies. Now, the only person I know who's a phony and so proud of it is Dolly Parton, right? Because she talks about being a phony, and she's probably one of the most authentic people in terms of her heart and what she does in the world. But yet, to look at her, she sure looks phony, and she laughs about it. So, that's what's so exciting about being authentic. Who I am, what I am, how I show up. If I am clear about it and I call it what it is, then when someone looks at me and has a judgment about whatever it is, it's off the table. We don't need to discuss it anymore. And then we can talk about why they're really sitting in front of me.
Yeah, did a training yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I talked about the 14-inch journey from your head to your heart to really be authentic.
Mhm,
I mean, you have to be who you are. I can't be you. You can't be me. We have to
mhm.
be who we are. And the more consistently we are that, the better it's going to be. Right. So
Correct.
I love the idea of coming into a business, small business, or any business for that matter, and helping them really understand what authenticity is and how they
Mhm.
can deliver it throughout their business. What
Mhm.
are some of the things that you see when you go into businesses where people maybe are masking that authenticity, or they're not they're not playing the real deal?
Well, what I see that makes me really sad is when I go into a business, a retail business especially, and the people who are behind the counters or the people at the registers are more involved in something other than the person that's standing right in front of them. The notion that a person would come into a business I owned and not be greeted, hello, how are you today? Did you find everything you need? um, Small talk, some sort of acknowledgement that
Mhm.
that will connect us as two humans, and then the unthinkable, not being told thank you. The common courtesies in business are disappearing because have a nice day, there you go, see ya. Though that is not gratitude. And we really, really need to begin to have more of a sense of gratitude for those things that come to us, not only in business, but in life, because when we have gratitude, it just draws in more. And that's probably the thing that makes me saddest about businesses. There's a real lack of service.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. In As a trainer, I train a lot on word choice,
Mhm.
and it drives me buggy when I say thank you to somebody and they say not a problem.
Mm.
It
Mhm.
drives me nuts
Mhm.
because there was no problem until you said not a problem.
Mhm.
Now I think there's a problem, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I agree with you that having authentic relationships behind the counter and behind things, it's one of the things. And I talk about in that example, Chick-fil-A. And if you ever go through a drive-through, and you ever say thank you to them, they'll say, "It's my pleasure."
Mm.
And they've trained everybody to say that. But
Mhm,
then once that training is done, it becomes embodied
mhm.
into the person. So I agree with you. I think you've identified a huge issue that's going on today. Simple manners. How do we get that back into business?
One person at a time. And it all starts with me because I'm the only person I can manage. You know, Scott, one of the things I did from day one with my own business, every single check I receive, whether it's from an insurance company, it's from a business, it's from an individual, I write thank you on it. And the reason I do that is because I never, ever want to forget my own level of gratitude. So when we are authentic and when we are focused on ourselves and realize we have no control over anyone else, we have influence, but no control. Every time I'm thoughtful, every time I'm polite, every time I run into a person behind the counter and ask, "Are you having a tough day?" because they're so surly, that's when it begins to shift. That's when it begins to shift because I have no control over anybody else. I do have influence, no control.
I,
And that's how it changes.
I love the idea of signing or writing thank you on the check, because as it goes back, not only is it a reminder for you,
Mhm,
obviously, that they've accommodated you and given you that certificate of appreciation called
mhm.
money, but they've also you are now thanking them for doing that. Not only do you see it, but once they receive it, somebody in their organization, whether it's them personally or whatever, probably looks at that canceled check and sees that and goes, that person must have done that. I really love that as an idea. I
Well,
think it's a
thank
great
you.
idea.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I might borrow that and share that a little bit. That's a
Please
good one.
do.
Uh, and I like the idea also that, you're saying it from the standpoint of you have influence, but you don't have control.
Mhm,
Um, in an earlier show that I was recording, we were talking about being able to um, encourage people to take an action and do that. So I love the fact that the recognition is there that you don't control it, but the opportunity is that you can influence it from that
right.
side. How, it seems to be a little bit of an indictment on our society right now, and I say it this way many times. Some of us more mature, that's actually code word for older. Uh,
Mhm.
some of us more mature folks remember the day when it was really the yes sir, no ma'am, thank you, I appreciate you, all those kinds of things. How do we get that spread back more broadly into society so that it can seep back into business? Is there a way?
That's $1 million question.
I think so.
I I do really believe that it is one person at a time. You brought up something very interesting that I write thank you and someone else will see it. What's really more important than that is that I know I've done it and I know the reason I've done it.
Mhm.
And I've shared this story maybe a dozen times over the years. So, for all those dozen people who have heard that, and for all the people that have looked down and seen that written on the check, they're the ones that know. And that's how we begin to make a shift. Um, I truly believe that the world needs a shift into understanding the shadow. I had the supreme privilege of studying with Debbie Ford before
Mhm.
she passed away, and she was just amazing in terms of doing shadow work. And I never dreamed in a million years I'd be flying from my little town in the Midwest out to San Diego, California for years to do individual work with her. But I learned, and it's integrated. It's part of my soul. The shadow is those parts of ourselves that we deem unworthy, wrong, bad. They hold a lot of shame. They hold a lot of judgment. They're parts like um, mean, rude, thoughtless, um, uh, lazy. Those are just a couple. People get up in the morning and they don't say, today I'm going to go out in the world and be rude. But the truth is, rude is a part of who we all are. Rude helps us set limits and boundaries. There are times that I'll be with a client and I'll say, we need to wrap up, and they don't want to stop. So I need to say, we really need to stop now. I just don't have any more time now, but we'll continue this next week. As I get up and walk to the door and open the door and show them out. So it's not a matter of I annihilate people with these behaviors. I use these behaviors. Scott, judgment is one. People will walk in and say, I'm so glad to be in a place where there's no judgment. And I like to correct them because I use my judgment in order to be able to do my work. If I didn't use my judgment, I wouldn't know how to speak to you. I wouldn't have an opportunity, an
Mhm.
opening, if you will, in a conversation to bring something to you that I'm experiencing that you might be oblivious to. So judgment is one of those things that can be a shadow quality, and people say, I don't want to be judgmental. Well, you'd better be, especially if you're driving, because if you
Yeah,
don't use your judgment when you're driving, you're going to be in big trouble.
I I think it's interesting. I think that we look at a word like that and or a process like that,
Mhm.
and we only think about a portion of it. We don't take into the value that actually is delivered by that, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
I said earlier this week, I remember, well, I'm not the judge and jury, and so it's interesting how all of a sudden it reminds you of that. Well, you do judge certain things, um, but anyway, it's interesting how these. So it seems as if, because it just happened to me,
Mhm.
that your process is really that about uh, g- gaining awareness to certain situations and then letting the conversation flow from there, which then allows for this authenticity in the relationships to start to expose itself. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes, yes, that would be a reasonable way to define my process. Scott, I want to mention to you too that I became a therapist in my 40s. I've had many different careers, and I have a farm background. So I come from the Midwest originally, and I have that background. And I was a mortgage lender. I've been a retail store manager. I've been in sales. I've been in the restaurant business. um, I, I have such a vast variety of knowledge and wisdom and experience that I've taken all that into a basket. And when I got my degree to become a therapist, I use every bit of that because that gives me the opportunity to understand people when they come to me and say, well, you probably don't know anything about this, but blah, blah, blah. And I say, is that the same as? And there
Yeah.
we go. There we go. It's relationship building.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of relationships. And um, I mean, I've always worked diligently in my career to be the hub to other people's spoke. So
Mm,
be there in a supportive way and work to lift them up. And by accomplishing that, a lot of good is done for all parties. So I love
Mhm.
the authenticity of the relationships and the creating the intentionality behind it to to get to that point where again you truly want to be
Mhm.
authentic in these relationships. And um, I love the fact that you actually do it sounding seemingly individually, on the one-on-ones.
Yes, and it turns out to be seamless that way too. One of the things I hear at the couch is people will say, I really wanted to say this or that, but they don't because they don't want to hurt people's feelings or make them feel bad. And again, we really don't have any control over anyone. How unfortunate that I would withhold something valuable I would
Right.
like to share with somebody, presuming that I know how they're going to think or how they're going to feel, not to mention what a detriment it is to that person.
It's a great point. I again have said many times I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff,
Hmm.
not great at mind reading.
Hmm.
So I agree that would be it would be a shame to not be able to open a conversation. There's a problem with no filter, and there's a problem with too much filter.
Extremes.
Extremes, yeah.
Yeah, extremes is what gets us into trouble all the time.
So how do we get rid of those extremes, or at least address them?
We acknowledge that it's very extreme. And sometimes that's what I'll do when I encounter a situation where someone is mean, rude, thoughtless, and I happen to be giving them money. And I'll acknowledge, this is really extreme behavior considering these are our roles. And then I'll elevate it to a manager and present it the same way because it's the extremes that always get us into trouble. It's not the middle of the road. It's not expressing ourselves. It's when we express ourselves with a bat in our hands and are very loud. That's when we get ourselves into trouble. So I think that's how we begin to minimize it as well.
Is that another thing that we're seeing in our society today, is the extremes?
Yes, most
And
definitely.
and so then it's leading to the tension, the not listening, the non-participation, all those things come out of the extremes,
Well, I have a
or many
theory.
of the things.
I have a theory. I think people are feeling very helpless, and I think they're feeling very hopeless. And I think that what they're doing is they're just turning up the volume more and more and more. And in doing that, they are being heard, but I don't think they're really being heard in the way that they want to be heard. And I don't think that it's taking the action that they want to have taken either.
No, I
Because
would
there's
I would I would think
there's a
that's very true.
yeah, there's a process with everything, and we can never speed up or slow down the process.
Yeah, in an earlier conversation today, we were talking about the extremes on either side, and without some kind of common ground, which is more towards the middle, it's hard to make progress in any direction, no matter what you'd want to accomplish.
Mhm.
And so, again, I think a big that's where again I think the authenticity in relationships come in being able to have conversations that identify that as it is,
Mhm.
and speak it. The extremes are an issue.
Mhm.
Can we move away from the extremes so that we can handle things or delegate things easier, whatever the
Yes.
whatever the case might be. So
Scott, go
sure.
ahead.
No, go
I
ahead.
I love to learn, and I'm actually in the process of doing a training right now to work with couples, and it's based on development. Now, you and I don't think about development. We typically think about development as being something that's with a baby or a child or an adolescent. We don't think about adults as developing, but the reality is that some adults are stuck in developmental phases in their life and they act in certain ways because they haven't fully gone through developmental stages. And that's just fascinating to me because we see on the news, we see people who are behaving like they're teenagers
Yeah.
and they're grown people, but their mindset is still teenage. And that's a real concern too.
Yeah. I related in a training I did yesterday. Uh, Halloween was a great time to um, ex- to expose and explore human nature. I said there was one video where kids walked up uh, to an empty bucket, an empty pumpkin where the candy once was.
Mhm,
And it looked like a probably about 10, 12-year-old was with an 8 and a 6-year-old, just judging by size.
mhm,
And he looked at the empty thing. The other two kids looked at the empty thing and they looked at each other. You could see it kind of in disappointment,
mhm.
and then took candy from their bag and started putting it in the empty bucket. And
Aw.
when the next kids came up, they saw that action, and so they did the same. Contrast that to another video where, unfortunately, teenagers walked
Mhm,
up to a big bucket. Uh, this family was nice enough to put full size candy bars in.
mhm,
You know, the first two boys that went up there took one each,
mhm,
and we're just like, oh, this is amazing. Look at the size of these things. You could hear them on the
mhm,
video.
mhm.
Next two walked up, took two each. And then the next group walked up and took fistfuls until they emptied the bucket. And you talk about the tale of two cities, right? The tale of two. How are these kids at a younger age doing such a wonderful, giving, loving thing versus these older kids doing something that anybody would say is probably inappropriate, not the thing that it should have been done.
That's what I refer to as a social experiment, when we can just sit back and just watch how people deal with different situations, because you'll see as many different reactions as you'll see people approaching the situation.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. I've shared that story twice now, and I've gotten the same reaction on both sides. So it's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
So, man, hard to believe how fast time flies as we're doing these shows and everything. How do people get a hold of the book? We want to make sure that they get a hold of that. How do they get a hold of the book, first of all?
Well, the first thing they can do right now is go to Brilliant Biz Book, all capital B's.com, and sign up for 100 free tips.
Oh, very nice.
Free tips for your small business. And then we will contact you on the day the book will be released, which is next Wednesday. It
Very
felt
nice.
so far away, but it's here now. Um, we will contact you on that day and give you a link where you can go to Amazon and download the digital copy of the book or purchase the paperback on that day.
That's wonderful. So,
Yes.
how do people get a hold of you should they want to do that?
Well, I've got a call to action, which is hashtag conduct authentic business, one word, or my website is so simple: learn, grow, develop, no spaces.
Nice.
Very
Su-
easy.
Wonderful. Susan, thank you for being here with us. We greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. I wish we had more time.
We're going to have to do it again.
I'd like that.
And thank you all for joining us here at Scott Schilling Speaks. We'll see you again tomorrow, exact same time. God bless.